Okay, hello. Hi, thank you everyone for joining us today for this edition of the GMF webinar series. We host this series every month at the last Thursday of the month, and we feature a different topic focused on GMF programs. Each installment is an introduction to one of our initiatives or sectors meant to inform and inspire you to take action locally and eventually initiate new projects in your community. So today we will be talking about sustainable municipal water management. Before we get started, my name is Jessie Granger. I'm the Knowledge Management and Learning Officer, and I'm here with my colleague Sharon, who's the project coordinator, and we're both in the Green Municipal Fund's capacity development team. Before we go any further, I'd like to take a moment to, on behalf of FCM, begin the session by acknowledging that I am joining you from the lands that have been inhabited by Indigenous peoples for thousands of years. We at FCM recognize the Algonquin Anishinaabe people as their traditional custodians of this land upon which our FCM offices and in my home where I join you from today are located. We also recognize the contribution of Métis, Inuit, and all First Nations, both in shaping and strengthening this country and community as a whole. I invite you to, in the chat, say hello, introduce yourself, and share where you are joining us from today. A couple housekeeping items before we get started. We have simultaneous interpretation is available for this event. So today's presenters will be speaking in English. If you'd like to listen in French, you can go down to the bottom of your screen. There is a circle that looks like a little bit of a globe for the interpretation button. So please click on that and select French. Aujourd'hui, nous avons des présentations en français et en anglais. Si vous souhaitez écouter en français, veuillez cliquer sur le bouton d'interprétation en bas à la droite de votre écran. C'est un petit globe et sélectionne l'option français. As we move through our presentations today, I ask that you submit your questions in the Q&A box as they come up. And after the presentations, we'll have one large Q&A session where we'll go through all the questions and answers at the end. So please feel welcome to put the questions into the box in the language of your choice. And as they come up, so that by the time we get to the Q&A, we should have a rich collection of questions to choose from, and we'll do our best to address all of them as quickly and easily as possible. So today's agenda, momentarily, I'll be passing the mic to my colleague, Catherine Loriot. She's the lead for the waste and water sectors, and she's going to give you a little bit of an introduction to that. Then we'll move to Jennifer Court, who is the lead on green infrastructure with GHD. She'll be presenting about some of the research and findings as well as opportunities that her research has presented for the municipal sector. And then we'll have our Q&A period followed by a presentation from Emily Marlowe, an advisor with our programs outreach team, also with the Green Municipal Fund. And she'll talk to us a little bit about the funding offers that we have available. So with that, Catherine, I'll move over to you and I'll get you started on our next slide here.
Thank you so much, Jessie. Hello, everybody. I'm so happy to be present with you today and welcome you to our webinar on the water sector. It's been quite a while at GMF that we didn't produce a webinar on the water sector. So I'm really happy to discuss with you our current and the past research we did in the last year about in the municipal water sector at the Green Municipal Fund. As many of you know, the GMF, our Green Municipal Fund, is an envelope that is available for municipalities, local governments, and their partners to obtain funding, but also capacity development, tools, resource, or even training in all the sectors you can see on the screen. So we provide financing for the energy sector, the waste management sector, land use, transportation, and water. As you will see in the presentation today, all those sectors are usually connected at the local level on a territory in communities. So, but we'll focus today on the water sector. If you can go to the next slide, please. I will talk a little bit more about the water sector at the Green Municipal Fund. So we provide in 3 streams funding and support in the water sector for municipalities that have projects that need to maybe study the feasibility of projects, or they want to pilot or test technologies in the 3 streams you see on the screen. So we support projects in the stormwater management sector stream, water conservation. It could be campaigns, it could be equipment or infrastructure that would help conserve water. And also in the wastewater treatment plants, it could be a feasibility study to study how to improve the quality of wastewater that is returned to the water basin. All these streams of funding were historically divided within the water sector because we have different eligibility criteria, but also different measurement of performance of projects that we provide for each of these streams. But the spirit of GMF for funding projects in the water sector will always remain that we want to improve the quality of the water that's managed by municipalities, but also the accessibility of potable water and the quality of wastewater that is returned to nature. So this will remain, and that's why we also want to present you today with the newest findings and research we did in the last year to help even more, or to try to understand even more how GMF can support municipalities that want to achieve better water management in their communities. It could be with infrastructure management, because we know and we heard that municipalities have a lot of needs for funding or investment in infrastructure management, and also for the quality of water, resilience to climate change, but also how to manage better the water that's already in their territory. You can change slide, please. And can you click to click more? So what we heard and what our research demonstrated in the past, very recent past, but we want to focus more on supporting municipalities at the Green Municipal Fund for the next years in helping them achieving sustainable water management systems, but also how these systems and water management at the municipal level, how could it contribute to achieving climate action and climate adaptation. So you will see with the presentation from Jennifer that there are a lot of solutions, or there's opportunities for the water sector and all these infrastructure systems, pipes, and treatment plants that we have across the country, that these systems can contribute to achieving net zero resilient communities across the country. And we know also that if we manage water as a whole, so we heard a lot of various concepts that are similar to circular water, one water, or the cycle of water, we found out that there's a lot of benefits in managing water in a sustainable way, in an integrated management way. So those benefits, you can see them on the screens. There are many more, and I'm sure Jennifer will even demonstrate how there are many more also. So of course, the goal is always to improve access to potable water or secure access to potable water, but also to have the best quality of potable water for human health, but also for conservation of our ecosystems and conservation of biodiversity. So it probably will go from the need to conserve water as much as possible, reduce the need of water as much as possible, and also that will all lead to, and it's not the only goal, but it will lead to a reduction in pollution, contaminants, and GHG emissions. So this is where I would like to introduce you to the next slide, please, Jessie, to Jennifer, with whom we worked in our sector development team at the Green Municipal Fund. We worked with GHD last year during the fall. We collaborated with Jennifer because we wanted to understand what are the needs and biggest priorities of municipalities across Canada in terms of how to achieve this sustainable water systems at the municipal level. So we did some, GHD did the literature review, they did research, and we also had a process of consultation and engagement with municipalities across the country. So I will lead you to Jennifer, who will present the results of that work, but also the opportunities that this can open or lead to. So Jennifer is a project manager, was the project manager for this mandate with GMF, and she's the lead for green infrastructure at GHD. She has 15 years experience in the environmental space, working across Canada with a particular focus on green infrastructure. Prior to joining GHD, Jennifer was the executive director of the Green Infrastructure Ontario Coalition. This work has also helped her to develop a broad understanding of the Canadian water sector's issues and drivers. Jennifer is also a member of the Canadian Water Resources Association. So it's next to you, Jennifer.
Thank you so much, Catherine. Okay, bear with me while I get my screen sharing. All right, that should be up for everyone.
Looks good, Jennifer.
Thank you. So I'm happy to be here today to talk to you some more about sustainable municipal water management. So I'm going to start by giving just a brief intro to GHD, and then talk about some of our work in the water space, particularly findings from GHD's recent Aquanomics report, which has a strong connection to the work that Catherine was speaking about, the engagement that we conducted in collaboration with GMF on the Canadian municipal water sector. So I will share a little bit more about that project, as well as some key findings and opportunities to increase the resilience of the sector and of our water resources more generally. As I said, I'm going to open with just a little bit of background about GHD. So GHD is one of the world's leading professional services companies operating in the global markets of water, energy, and urbanization. We provide engineering, environmental, advisory, architectural, digital, and construction services to both public and private sector clients. GHD was established in 1928 and is privately owned by our people and operates across 5 continents. Our forward-looking, innovative approach lasting community benefit around the world. We're global leaders in integrated water management, or IWM, or One Water, and recognize that to optimize water supply, water quality, flood protection, and sustainability, a more holistic approach to water management is required. So in short, very passionate about sustainable water. And because of that, we know that the health of our planet is inextricably linked to how well we manage our water resources. From extreme water scarcity to rising sea levels, from crippling drought to flooding rains, all have an increasing impact on the people and places in every part of the world. The challenges associated with climate change are of particular concern for Canada, because according to Canada's Changing Climate Report, Canada is warming at double the global mean rate. So GHD has an initiative called Future of Water, which acknowledges these challenges and works collaboratively to co-create positive solutions to deliver positive water outcomes that respect nature and nurture communities. We also wanted to have a deeper understanding of the water-related impacts of climate change, particularly the economic impacts of water risks. And this was the driver for our recent Aquanomics project. So you're seeing a bit of a snapshot on the screen here. Aquanomics uses a bespoke model to estimate the future economic impact of water risk from droughts, floods, and storms in 10 geographies at both a GDP and a sector level. And the numbers we found were staggering. 5.6 trillion could be lost between 2022 and 2050 due to these events. We also projected the specific water risks for 7 countries, representing a diverse range of climates. Those countries were Australia, Canada, China, the Philippines, the United Arab Emirates, the UK, and the United States. I'm going to share some of the specific projections for Canada. So Canada may not be a water-stressed country, but it is a country of extremes, and these extremes are getting more and more pronounced. As you may already know, the Canadian government is estimating the country is warming at double the rate of the rest of the world. As I mentioned, that stat has come out in a number of different reports, which is increasing the amount of climate emergencies across the country, meaning there are more and more reasons to implement policies to boost resiliency. We know that Canada's large landmass, combined with low population density, contributes to water risk having less of an impact than many other countries in the world and in the study, but it's important to understand that there are still risks. According to Aquanomics, droughts, floods, and storms could result in a total loss of 108 billion to Canadian GDP in 2022 and 2050, which is an average annual GDP loss of 0.2%. Flooding alone is expected to cost the Canadian economy over 30 billion in the years leading up to 2050. And then to get a little bit more specific, looking at the city of Toronto as an example, it's losing approximately 103 million liters of water per day due to aging pipes. Aging infrastructure is a challenge that's familiar to many municipalities across the country, so I'm sure that really resonates. And we really need to mitigate this sort of wastage, which is entirely possible through solutions such as predictive monitoring. So despite high levels of insurance and excellent disaster risk reduction systems in place, the Canadian population is still vulnerable to water-related hazards. We've seen many examples, such as the 2021 BC floods, which saw the city of Vancouver cut off when the transportation corridor linking it to the rest of the country was flooded out. And for First Nations, issues of inequitable access to clean, safe drinking water are an urgent priority. I'm not going to dwell here, but this slide highlights the projected losses by sector and direct losses by event type. And if you're interested in digging deeper into the Aquanomics findings, I can share a link to the final report with you once I'm done speaking. But in short, this report represents an unequivocal call to action to adapt and to use an adaptive management model to increase flexibility and minimize risk, to optimize the performance of existing infrastructure, and to prioritize regenerative and nature-based solutions. And through a series of client interviews that we've completed, we heard very similar results to what I will share with you from our work with the GMF in just a moment, really speaking about the dynamic global forces that are placing pressure on water resources and the increasing need for resilient assets to be able to withstand societal, environmental, and economic disruption. Climate change is manifesting an increased incident and severity of natural disasters, 90% of which are disaster related. More people and growing urbanization are increasing pressure on infrastructure and resources, both natural and built, and many people underestimate the value of water and the cost to deliver water-related services. So those findings, going to come up again, very similar, as I said, to some of the results of the Canadian municipal water sector research that we conducted in collaboration with GMF. So I'm going to start with an overview of the scope and methodology. Bear with me for 1 second while I just take a sip of water. So this research was informed by how to accelerate the transition to sustainable water management, considering GHG emission reductions and accelerating net zero actions, with an eye to Canada's net zero climate goals of achieving net zero by 2050. So the scope of work, Catherine touched on this, but it included background research, a literature review, a national survey, focus groups, and then analysis of all of those results, which resulted in a report. Catherine showed you the cover, as well as a presentation to the FCM and GMF water team. We move very quickly through some of that work. So we conducted desktop research, reviewing key Canadian resources about the water sector and municipal needs and drivers, including resources from FCM, from the Canadian Water Network, and others in the space. Concurrently, we prepared and launched our national survey. Very pleased to have responses from every province and territory represented. We had a total of 68 survey respondents, but some of those survey respondents represented organizations that represented multiple municipalities, meaning that in total, the number of municipalities represented by the survey respondents was over 330. We asked demographic questions to gain an understanding of the characteristics of the communities that the respondents represented. However, the bulk of the survey focused on understanding drivers, priorities, and needs, including what factors are driving municipal decision-making, with a focus on that goal of transitioning to sustainable water management. Respondents were also asked about the internal and external factors that are driving their decision-making processes and what they're doing to meet climate goals in the water sector. And then finally, we conducted virtual focus groups with representatives from the municipal water sector. And so again, we had a broad range of municipalities represented through our focus groups, particularly by representation from organizations who had multiple municipalities within their jurisdiction. And these were virtual, supported by a mural board, fostering engagement, and allowed us to have a broad reach and the ability to dig deeper into the challenges that municipalities are facing, their goals and priorities, and their drivers and needs. Now I'll share some of the key findings and outcomes from this research. To understand respondents' detailed priorities, we asked them to classify a series of drivers according to their priority in municipal decision-making, according to a number of categories, including climate change, financial sustainability, institutional resilience, capacity, resident and user needs, water quality, water quantity, social justice, and asset management. So each of those categories were pre-populated with potential drivers based on our background research. Respondents were asked to rate each driver priority level, and then the highest priorities overall were summarized and are demonstrated on this slide, which I'm sure will be familiar to many of you. So we heard a lot of concerns about staff capacity, particularly for operations and maintenance, but workforce overall. Emergency planning and business continuity, strong focus there on climate change, as well as financial capital asset rehabilitation, protecting source water supply, and generally increasing resilience. We also asked respondents to rank needs from the most to least important. And the top results here were funding for capital infrastructure, funding for capacity building, and resourcing. So again, looking at that capacity and resourcing piece, as well as aging infrastructure challenges. So those were responses from the survey based on the focus groups, based on distilling the rest of the survey results down, as well as detailed conversations from the focus groups. We organized some of the key challenges that we heard into themes, which you're seeing in front of you. So I'm going to elaborate on these themes just a little bit. So number one, acute challenges for smaller municipalities. Representatives from smaller municipalities voiced a long list of challenges that they were facing. Due to their smaller tax base, these municipalities have less funding available to cover operational costs like salaries. And they also often have fewer full-time staff who are stretched thin between multiple roles. These municipalities are more likely to miss out on grant and funding opportunities because their staff don't have the capacity to complete or sometimes even to seek out funding applications. So growing that divide between municipalities that have more staff, more resourcing, and more ability to seek out external funding. A sentiment that was echoed within the focus groups is that decarbonization often seems to be exclusive to those who can afford it. In the context of reducing greenhouse gas emissions, implementing circular water, or implementing a climate strategy or plan, small municipalities lag further behind larger municipalities. With reduced budgets, small municipalities often only have capacity to respond to immediate and essential needs. Participants in the focus groups would like to be able to plan for sustainable water management, but in many cases, they felt that they didn't have the capacity. So next, water conservation. Attitudes around water conservation pose particularly in areas that are perceived as water rich, which, honestly is many parts of Canada. Residents in these areas often hold the belief that their water supply is endless and use water much more liberally than in water stressed or water scarce areas. And some municipalities have tried investing in advertising campaigns to raise awareness about water scarcity. Oops, I got a little ahead of myself. But they've often faced challenges in getting responses to those advertisements. So there's more need for public education on water conservation. Canadians are also used to paying very little for their water, which can reinforce the idea that it's plentiful. And there's a poor understanding of what it costs to actually deliver water to customers, partly because the infrastructure is underground and out of sight. Some municipalities have seen incredible success implementing water meters. And when water meters came up in our focus group discussions, everyone was excited about it. However, the common sentiment was, oh, I wish I could, but those programs are very unpopular with residents, and so they're difficult to implement. And members of several focus groups brought up the idea of changing attitudes towards water, fostering respect and challenging the myth that water is abundant. So one focus group member in particular emphasized the importance of considering the work of Indigenous scholar Michael Blackstock and his concept of blue ecology. Certainly heard a lot about Indigenous perspectives generally, and the acute need within Indigenous communities. I'm going to touch specifically on blue ecology again in just a moment. But I'm going to move through the next themes. So moving on, lack of funding to address drought. So funding to address drought was something that came up in every focus group. Drought and flooding are often inextricably linked because long periods of drought make a region more vulnerable to flooding. However, while there is increasingly more funding for flooding through programs like the Disaster Mitigation and Adaptation Fund, among others, participants struggled to find comparable funding to address droughts. Participants were adamant that there needs to be more funding available to assist municipalities in addressing droughts and solutions that deal with the dual challenges of both droughts and floods. Eager for solutions. And so finally, getting ahead of myself again, bear with me. So finally, water and wastewater treatment. The conversation around this topic focused on barriers to sustainable water management. However, water and wastewater treatment are large consumers of energy, and operators don't have many options in many cases around where that energy comes from. And so a need to be able to have support, to have greater understanding of how to reduce energy, looking for opportunities, implement those programs was something that came up quite frequently. All right, now moving on to opportunities. So these findings, as I mentioned, were very similar to the results of the client conversations that I already mentioned. Before I get into specific opportunities, I want to emphasize the fact that, we're talking about the municipal water sector. I've talked a lot about the challenges for municipalities, what we heard from municipalities, but I also want to emphasize that while municipalities bear a significant responsibility for water management in Canada, they're not alone. Stakeholders across the water sector can play a role in supporting municipalities, expanding their capacity, and developing and implementing innovative solutions to advance sustainable water management. And we're all in this together. So in the next few slides, I'm going to highlight opportunities to foster collaboration, to change mindsets, and to take advantage of momentum around existing actions in order to accelerate a transition to sustainable water management in Canada. So coming back to that idea of, the dual challenges of flooding and droughts, climate change support for both adaptation and mitigation was another significant opportunity that came up through our research. Municipalities, especially smaller municipalities, felt that they're not positioned to proactively address climate change, particularly the current impacts of climate change. With current market conditions, municipal budgets are being stretched thin, leaving little to no room for proactive GHG reductions or net zero actions. And even long-term investments in the future, like green infrastructure or expansive water conservation programs, often become deprioritized due to lack of financial resources and capacity challenges. So looking at what we can do, again, collaboration, I think, is really key here, looking at how the sector can come together to overcome these challenges, looking at ways to support municipalities in being able to respond to their forward-looking goals. There is a desire to do it. So how can we collaborate to bolster that? One possible way is promoting innovation by leapfrogging traditional approaches. So I've touched on this already, but Canada's municipal infrastructure deficit is very well documented. You can see resources like the Canadian Infrastructure Report Card. And so it's no surprise that we heard a lot about financial capital, asset rehabilitation as being priorities. So the results of our engagement showed that many municipalities, particularly smaller and rural municipalities, are concerned with day-to-day challenges and infrastructure deficit, which make it more difficult to focus on those longer-term actions. And so again, collaborative efforts between public and private partners could help municipalities that are in need of infrastructure upgrades to design their systems to be more resilient and prioritize these goals, like accelerating actions towards net zero. So I'm going to show some examples. I think, looking at innovative new technologies, smart monitoring, looking at combining centralized and decentralized systems, creating forums for neighboring municipalities to come together and be able to then leverage sort of bulk purchasing, bulk decision-making efficiencies, as well as those broader industry-wide collaboration are really solutions to both of those problems. And so now I'm going to come back to the idea of a one water approach. So this has been introduced a few times. Catherine spoke about it as well. An overarching recommendation that we came to throughout our analysis of the results is that a transition to sustainable water management must include a holistic one water approach, bringing together public and private partners, diverse stakeholders, varied perspectives, and multidisciplinary approaches to develop and implement innovative solutions to municipalities' water challenges. So while the GMF is focused on supporting municipalities, municipalities often feel like they're alone in their challenges. Again, I want to emphasize that there's really room for partnership in this space, coming together to foster collaboration around this idea of one water, and the fact that as stakeholders, we all need to come together to solve the challenges that we're facing. So those were some of the key opportunities that came up, but there were several other sort of standout recommendations that we thought were really interesting. We wanted to dig more into. So I'm going to go through those quickly on this slide. So I mentioned I would come back to the idea of blue ecology and changing perceptions about water. So there's a connection here with that idea of one water or water sensitive cities that I'm going to touch on in just a moment. Also really wanted to think about this from an Indigenous perspective. The idea that municipalities need to change, the idea of changing perceptions around water was something that came up in many of our discussions. And a leading effort that's gaining traction, particularly in Western Canada, that we found really interesting on this front is the idea of blue ecology. Again, the author of that work is Michael Blackstock. So within this framework, readers are encouraged to perceive water as having a spirit in the hopes that that will place more value on this precious resource. And while it might seem challenging to attain that in a more broad-spread way, we're seeing momentum that makes me hopeful that that is not in fact the case. There have been similar shifts in perception happening around the world. So I'm going to apologize in advance for some of my pronunciation here. Bear with me. So in 2017, the Wagwani Rover in New Zealand was the first ever river to be granted personhood and given enforceable legal rights, with 2 human guardians appointed to speak on its behalf. A week later, 2 rivers in India were also declared to be living entities. And then in 2019, all the rivers in Bangladesh were given the status of living entities. And then in 2021, here at home, the Mutushukwa Shipu River in Canada was declared to be a legal person. So shifting perceptions, really taking on that idea that water isn't just something that we use and then becomes waste, but it's something that we really need to value. It's something that is really crucial to our existence in this world and should be treated as such. So on a similar vein, moving into valuing the services provided by nature or the benefits provided by nature, seeing more widespread protection and implementation of green infrastructure. Obviously, I'm coming from a biased perspective here, but it's a key action in the transition towards sustainable low carbon water management. And in order to support this action, there's a couple of things that municipalities and their partners can be doing. So first of all, practicing ecosystem service valuation in order to value the services provided by nature, understand them more broadly. And then secondly, looking at the more widespread incorporation of green infrastructure assets into municipal asset management and looking at valuation from a different perspective where green infrastructure assets like trees, bioswales, vegetation, the list goes on, I can provide other examples, are managed on a level playing field with traditional assets, given an equivalent value, a replacement cost, and so they can be proactively managed and funded within the same frameworks as traditional assets like roads and bridges. And that really enables those assets to thrive, to deliver their full range of benefits and services. I could go on and on about green infrastructure, but I won't today. Feel free to follow up with me about it. And then the final opportunity is within the context of the National Asset Inventory, which was announced by the federal government, has not yet taken place. As that's being shaped, there's a real opportunity to create a national inventory of water assets, including their GHG outputs. The inclusion of a GHG footprint for all assets within the planned infrastructure assessment would provide a full picture of the emission profile of the water sector assets and all other Canadian infrastructure to be able to create a better understanding of baseline emissions to help municipalities prioritize as they work towards net zero emissions. I am going to move on now and provide a couple of examples of how we have seen some of these opportunities in action. So I'm going to start by looking at Vancouver, where they've really pulled a few of these different concepts and opportunities together through the foundation of their Rain City strategy. So the vision is that Vancouver's rainwater is embraced as a valued resource for communities and natural ecosystem. One water approach embodied there. The strategy was formally adopted in 2019, and it articulates the aspirational goal of having Vancouver become a water-sensitive city. There are three key goals, which you can see on the slide in front of you: improving and protecting water quality, increasing resilience through sustainable water management, and enhancing livability by improving natural and urban ecosystems. So this is a forward-looking, aspirational strategy with the goal to achieve a paradigm shift in how water is managed by 2050. Though it's aspirational, there are a series of pragmatic steps that are included in the strategy to help get there. And so the core of that is a commitment to capturing and cleaning a minimum of 90% of Vancouver's average rainfall volume over the long term, and managing urban rainwater runoff from 40% of impervious areas by 2050. Of this target, 30% will come from redevelopments, and the remaining 10% will be achieved through the implementation of strategic retrofits of impervious surfaces across the city, including green rainwater infrastructure. So while rainwater management is the priority for Vancouver, the practices that they're implementing have applicability for drought management in Canada as well, which I'll talk about in a moment. But while I'm talking about Vancouver, I'll also mention that they're taking a proactive approach to valuing the services provided by nature through a robust strategic approach to green infrastructure asset management. Again, a topic that's close to my heart. So really just wanted to emphasize that Vancouver is really pulling a few of those different threads together. And while it's easy to say, Vancouver, large city, well-funded, I think there's some lessons there that are really broadly applicable to all municipalities across Canada. Again, from that perception of water as a resource, and green infrastructure asset management is for everyone. So for my next example, we could talk about that idea of centralized and decentralized rainwater capture and storage, combining both natural and engineered solutions, which has the potential to significantly increase resilience to the dual challenges of flood and drought. To illustrate this potential, I'm going to go a little bit farther from home to Fisherman's Bend, Australia's largest urban renewal project, covering approximately 250 hectares in the heart of Melbourne, which will have 120,000 residents and 60,000 workers by 2050. The site has a number of challenges, including being low-lying and at the risk of riverine, coastal, and stormwater flooding, has contaminated soils, shallow groundwater, and undercapacity assets, among others. To tackle this challenge in an innovative and forward-looking way by including considerations of climate resilience, urban ecology, and integrated water management. The resulting plan incorporates green infrastructure for stormwater capture and reuse and recycling, blended with space for active transportation and recreation, while also providing habitat and the basic functions of a city, roadways, a vibrant community. And these strategies are all easily applicable within the Canadian context as well. So to wrap up, I just want to say, while communities across the country are already feeling the impacts of a changing climate, in many ways, these are experienced through water with frequent and intense flood, storm, and drought cycles. And all of these put an increased pressure on municipal water systems. However, the good news is that despite these challenges, most municipalities are already considering the transition to sustainable water management in their decision-making, and even municipalities that don't currently have the resources to change their current practices would like to do so, and would like to consider this within their decision-making in the next 10 years with the right conditions and resources. Municipalities bear a significant responsibility for water management in Canada, but as I said, they're not alone. Stakeholders across the water sector can play a role in supporting municipalities, expanding their capacity, and developing and implementing innovative solutions to advance sustainable water management. The opportunities that I've highlighted today can position Canada's water sector to create conditions that will enable municipalities to move beyond focusing on the concerns of today and work towards creating a more resilient, sustainable future. We're all in this together. So I will end there. Feel free to reach out with any questions about this research or about green infrastructure in general. So thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Jennifer. That was a great presentation. I think I got chills when you mentioned water resources and rivers getting that sort of person status and the recognition of that spirit. It's a complete shift in lens and thinking of how we respect and value and interact with water. So I'm so glad you shared that. Thank you. We do have a few questions in the chat, and we have just a couple minutes to get to them here. So Donald had submitted a question. He said, when speaking of the technology, which was on an earlier slide, are we referring to technology as a whole or to water management technology? And then he also just said, to rephrase, are we referring to technology or just water management technology? And I think that was maybe partway through your slides. If you wanted to see if you could quickly find that, or do you already know what he might be referring?
Yeah, I'm looking at the timestamp and trying to think about where that was.
Okay.
I think new technology was highlighted within some of these survey findings as well as in potential solutions. And certainly the context is water management technology. But I think, what we talked about in some of the focus groups was also, bringing in technologies that have not been used to date, looking at, applicability of existing technologies to the water sector or innovation in technology to support the water sector. And so, yeah, in short, it is both.
Great, thank you. And I'm seeing here in the chat as well a question from Kathleen that ultimately ends with sort of a question around project approval for GMF. So perhaps my colleague Emily, I might invite you to answer that one in the chat if you can, or if you wanted to answer quickly live, whichever you prefer. Did you?
I'll answer in the chat. I'm just going to read it quickly and I'll answer in the chat so we can continue to take
perfect. Yeah. Okay. So we'll get to that one in the chat. Thank you, Kathleen. And I have another question here from Linda. My municipality experiences water shortages in summer. We have put a moratorium on constructions in certain zones and introduced a more stringent regulation. What hard data exists to prove or refute the effectiveness of water meters in communities other than large cities? And also ditto to the awareness building campaign that you mentioned. Jennifer, any comments on that?
Yeah, I have a couple comments. So I'd have to follow up in terms of specific data. However, the results of this research were incredibly pro water meters. Everything we heard from respondents was that water meters were very effective, but unpopular. And so the challenge isn't in the effectiveness of water meters, it's in the challenge is in the implementation and getting buy-in for water meters. Public awareness campaigns, the challenge there was much more related to budget and rollout. So having the capacity to do that and to do that at the scale that's necessary, because as I'm sure all know, people need to hear messages multiple times in order for them to be effective. And so from a financial resources perspective, that can be challenging.
Certainly. Okay, thank you for that. I'm seeing another question here about funding being allocated to innovation solutions. So lots of questions around funding. Perhaps what I'll do is just pass the the microphone to Emily, who's one of the program's outreach advisor who can speak to GMF funding and as well share her contact information, which is the best way to learn more is to contact us. So maybe Emily, over to you to share a bit more.
For sure. Hi, everyone. Bonjour tout le monde. I'll quickly share my screen. What I'm going to do is that I'm going to share a bit of information, but if you still have more questions after, I'll take question if there's still some time. Or yes, as Jessie was saying, please reach out and I'll be more than happy to continue the conversation. So hopefully you're now seeing my presentation, Jessie?
Yeah, we got it.
Excellent. So we don't have much time. I'll just jump right into it. As mentioned, my name is Emilie. I'm an outreach advisor with the Green Municipal Fund. So basically that means that my job is both to promote our funding programs, making sure that you all know about it, but also to help municipalities build sustainable development projects that have a higher chance of succeeding in securing that funding. So I'm sure that, like me, you found the presentation today was quite inspiring. It gave me lots of ideas. I'm sure that's same for you. I just wanted to kind of pop in at the end of the webinar and just remind you that, as mentioned by Catherine at the beginning, we have training, we have resource, but we also have funding to support your initiative at the Green Municipal Fund. So we have 5 funding sector, land use, transportation, waste, water, obviously, and energy. And as you might already know, we recently received an additional envelope of $530 million from the federal government to support municipal climate change adaptation projects. So that's part of the National Adaptation Strategy. So we'll be launching that new program early in 2024. So stay tuned to learn more about that. And I know there's a great connection with water projects as well. So I think that's going to be very relevant. So I won't do a deep dive into all of those funding sectors today because 5 minutes, 5 hours would probably not be enough. But I just kind of want to let you know that at the Green Municipal Fund, we want to meet you where you're at with your projects. So as you can see on the slide right now, we are offering funding in form of grants to cover up to 80% of the eligible costs for a plan, a study, or a pilot project, so that depends on the funding stream. And we also offer a combination of grants and loan to cover, again, up to 80% of eligible costs of a capital project. So in terms of eligibility, I saw a couple of questions on that. We have criteria for each of our stream. So I would encourage you to reach out to me and we can discuss how, where your project fits and what would be the eligibility criteria that would apply. But in general, and for applicants, obviously we're the Green Municipal Fund, so all municipal government are eligible applicants. We also can accept application from municipal partners. So that could be a municipally owned corporation, not-for-profit organization. There is some space for private sector entities, but it has to be well defined. So it's a bit of a more complicated conversation. It could also be some other organization offering municipal services or indigenous communities in certain cases, for example. The news is we accept application on a continuous basis. So there's no deadlines. You don't need to write down anything. You go at your own pace. So if after this presentation you go to our website, like I was saying, I could be here and talk about our programs for 5 hours. It's basically because you'll probably find something like 60 different program stream on our website. That's exciting, but it can also feel a bit overwhelming when you're looking to know, where does my project fit? So that's why my team is here. We're here to help you navigate our offers. We're here to help you identify opportunities and support you in preparing, the best possible application. So basically, the first step is just to get in touch with us. You don't even need to have a very defined project in mind. It's often even better if you're just in brainstorming mode, and then we can let you know, what orientation we have and how we can make sure that there's a synergy between the project that you're building and the funding that we are offering. So to get in touch with us, you have the contacts here, you have mine. I would be more than happy to discuss your project. Otherwise, you have the general email address at gmfinfo@fcm.ca. phone number. Obviously, our website has a wealth of information about funding, training, resource. Take a day off and go play. It's worth it. And just to, stay on top of all new funding offers and training opportunities, you can subscribe to our newsletter. So that would be FCM Connect, and you also have the information. So that's all for me. I'll leave, maybe if that's okay with you, Jessie, I'll leave my slide there for everyone to have a chance to write down contact information while we take questions.
Sure. Well, I was actually just going to share one slide about the upcoming webinar. So,
all right.
sorry.
I'll let you do that. I'll put my contacts in the chat, people.
Yes, and actually Sharon has shared your contacts in the chat as well, but we have had a ton of questions
Wonderful.
about funding today. So please reach out to the outreach team. That is literally their job, is to answer all of those questions for you. So please take the time to do that. In our last few minutes, I would just like to plug, here we go, our next webinar. So thank you, Emily. Before we go, I do want to quickly plug our next webinar in the series. It is an SCC rerun. So many of you might be familiar with our flagship event, the Sustainable Communities Conference, or SCC. We hosted it last February, or I guess just a few weeks ago. And we chose one of our highest rated workshops from the event. We invited the speakers back, and we are now wanting to share more broadly with all of you. So it's titled Being the Face of Your Community's Climate Action Plan. That's the name of the webinar and the workshop that was at SCC. I was there, and there were so many meaningful suggestions and insights that were shared. And sometimes it's a challenging and exciting position to be in. And so it's a wonderful conversation about all of the aspects of that. So I really invite you. I think it's a great, it will be of great interest to everyone in our audience. So Sharon has shared the registration link in the chat. If you'd like to go, it's already open, so you can feel free to register now. And just to our next slide to say thank you. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you for your attention, your questions, your time. And my colleague Sharon is just going to do the final step of launching the poll. I see it's there now. So please take a few moments to answer the questions, tell us how we did today, and otherwise enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you so much for joining us.